Weather. It's a natural phenomenon, and it happens every day in every form in every part of the world. Climate-wise, North America has the most violent and diverse climate on Earth, thusly giving us snowstorms, rainstorms, and thunderstorms. Recently, here in Central Virginia, we have had two very different seasons. Last winter will go down as one of the most memorable on record for our generation, with over 30 inches of snow. Contrast that to this fall, when we have had severe weather in what seems to be on a more numerous scale than in years past. Are the events connected? Are they part of a weathered pattern? Or are they just normal climatology? To help us answer this question, we enlisted the help of local television meteorologist Sean Sublette, a master's degree holder from Penn State, and a local television veteran to clarify. We first asked him what his views were on last winter. Our case storms were all three that impacted Central Virginia last December.
There were a lot of things going on in the atmosphere leading up to the winter in October, November that suggested there was going to be a strong El Nino and we'd have a lot of moisture into here. The trick for us, I think, is we thought, well, that would mean it's a wet winter but also a mild winter. Very few people who kind of look at this stuff saw the big NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, staying in this massively negative phase. That was a record setter in terms of talking about that particular oscillation which delivers cold air into the eastern United States. That was at a record level in terms of, you calculate the index, it was -5, -6, which was just unheard of low, consistently delivering cold. So as we got into the 1st of December and I saw some of the shorter range computer guidance setting up, I'm like, wow, it is going to get cold in December. And you kind of saw it's going to be cold this December. Then the question was going to be, how consistent is this going to be? Is it really going to stay cold all winter? Or are we going to break out of this? Because one of the things I remember very distinctly was the winter of '89-'90. It was bitter cold in December of '89, but there was a huge pattern flip. And January and February of '90 were quite mild, very mild in comparison. I don't have the data with me right now, but it was a very dramatic switch in the weather pattern. But I think once we got into the second half of January, because we had a little bit of a thaw, relative thaw in January, it was a little milder, everything finally melted off. Then we had that storm toward the end of January. And even as that storm was happening, we saw in the computer guidance a lot of suggestions where we're going to get another one very early in February. So we had that back-to-back period there to close January and early February. And I think as we were getting to that 3rd and 4th week of January, it was like, this is really going to be one people remember.
We then asked Mr. Sublette, did he think the media or social networking blew the winter out of proportion?
Snow is big business, fair or not. People, if it's going to snow, people want to know about it. For example, in the second event that snow, some wild rumor came down the pipe that VDOT expects us to get 30 inches of snow. And we just looked around going, where the devil did that come from? I mean, really, I have no idea. I mean, you all heard these stories about these crazy things on the internet, chain mails that go around, and that's kind of what happened. We knew it would be a big snowstorm, but there's no way. No way there was going to be 30 inches of snow. We never once said that. Another thing that happens nowadays is with the internet, there is so much access to weather data now, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there are a lot of people who will grab a computer simulation and go, wow, look at this, let's get ready for this. Like, I don't remember exactly, but I know Matt and I were looking at one of those computer simulations, and it suggested we would get, I think, 40 inches of snow. And we're like, this will not happen. And sometimes people, oh, well, you're holding back, you're not telling us the truth. I'm like, look, man, this computer model just told me we're going to get 40 inches of snow. In my professional opinion, I think that's balderdash. I'm not trying to hide anything from you, but that possibility is so remote. If I mention it,
and it doesn't happen,
okay, that's all anybody's going to remember. You said we were going to get 40 inches of snow. So is that possibility on the table? Sure. Is it enough of a possibility worth mentioning and stirring up a bunch of racket? I don't think so.
Past winter, when we had
Yeah.
all three storms, tell us a quick story. What was your most memorable coverage event?
Well, I think for us, the biggest things were the Saturday morning coverage. We were the two very long Saturday morning events, the December and I think the January event, where we were on the air 4 or 5 hours Saturday morning. We went on the air Saturday morning, stayed on the air till I guess 10 or 11 a.m. just in snow coverage. So I mean, for us, that's as good as it gets. The good thing about covering a snowstorm versus a tornado outbreak or severe thunderstorms, it's a slower evolving event. So I think covering those two storms during those two Saturday mornings was the most memorable thing for us. And it's fun because you'll get to go out and cover it. You'll go outside in the snow. You'll talk about the snow. You talk about what you see out there, telling people what the snowfall rates is. You take the yards, like, hey, we've gotten this much here, and we heard from these people they've got this much. And then you go back in, and 20 minutes later you do something from the key wall back there, and then you go back outside, and it's always different. It's always changing, and that's fun. The worst part was after the December storm, when it was all over, and I had to drive home, and we had 15 inches of snow on the ground, and the roads simply, for better or worse, had not, the secondary roads, primary roads were fine, but the secondary roads leading up to my home hadn't been touched, and I didn't have enough ground clearance in my car to get all the way to my home. I was stuck about a half a mile from my house on a secondary road, because there were ruts, from where the four-wheelers went through, and I don't, it's just the way it is, I don't have a four-wheeler, it's my decision. It just got stuck. There wasn't enough ground clearance, so we had to dig and move it to the side of the road so the plows could get through, and we went out the next day, sure enough, the plow would come through, we were able to dig and move and get the thing back into the yard, back into the house. So that was a unique situation for us.
After the winter was over, it gave way to a very warm summer. Temperatures reached record levels in many of the cities around central Virginia. Summer gave way to fall, and it's been an active one. Our case storm, the recent October nighttime tornadoes. Going into the week in October with the tornadoes that touched down in Henry County and also down into Halifax County. From my limited experience, it almost looked like it was a spring-type pattern when you have a front coming in, and then you have a warm front lifting up, and you get into the warm sector, and then the cold front comes in, you have a clash, and then it moves on out.
Yeah, and that setup is, you had that setup in the fall like you do in the spring because it's a big transitional season. The big difference here is what's going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere, because that's how you're starting to generate the spin that you need to produce tornadoes. I mean, a regular cold front coming through is generally not going to give you the same dynamics. I mean, you need to have shear. You've got to have winds that are turning with height in the atmosphere to generate some kind of spin. If the winds are all from the south through the depth of the atmosphere, it's going to be very difficult to generate tornadoes. But if your winds are from the southwest, then as you go up 3,000 to 4,000 feet, there's this veering of the wind. In other words, there's this clockwise turning of the wind with height. So then once you go up to 8,000 or 9,000 feet, the winds are coming more from the west. You've got winds coming from two different directions, and that's going to start to induce the spin. And that was the setup that we had. And the front was stalled for a couple of days. And that's why, I even went to my news staff, I'm like, we're going to be in this extended period where tornadoes are a threat. 36 hours, where we're going to have, there's a threat of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. They might come in the middle of the bloody night, which a couple of them did. This isn't normal. There's a certain level of normal kind of weather people expect. When you've been here long enough, you lived in the middle Atlantic all your life, you get thunderstorms in the afternoon, sun tends to go down, they go away. That's kind of the normal experience. We wanted to be sure and point out to people, this is not the typical situation. Please pay attention. The parent low actually never came anywhere near us. The parent low went up into the Great Lakes. When you talk about the center of low pressure, that tracked up into the Great Lakes. The cold front dragged down to the south and went through here finally. But that's part of the reason the front stalled, is because the low is kind of hanging out there west of the Appalachians and going northeastward into the Great Lakes. The upper level winds were very much from the southwest, so that front was sitting there, not advancing for a while. So we stayed in that same moisture-laden air mass with the vertical wind shear, and that's why we had that ongoing problem. The depth of the low, or in terms of the surface pressure, it did set the record. The record set was the lowest surface pressure of any area of low pressure in the United States that did not have tropical origins.
Well, you mentioned that the first tornado warning came out on that night around 11:35. It was for Henry County.
Yeah.
And then you had another one that went out, I think at like 3:30 for Halifax County.
Yeah.
Walk me through that evening in October.
You know, at that point, you're just trying to keep up. You know, you see the threat coming to pass. You know, and we saw the circulation, like the Weather Service did, developing on the radar. And I can't remember for certain now, but I think we made mention of this earlier on, like 11:15 in the main weather segment. There's a storm coming out of North Carolina right now. It's going to be affecting Henry County, and it's showing some signs of rotation. You know, that's kind of like, it's kind of the red flag. It's showing signs of rotation, which means we're worried about it. It may produce a tornado. You know, and then we're looking upstream, and as expected, we're getting more and more development down in North Carolina. They're rapidly developing in North Carolina. So once that tornado warning hit, it's like, we're going to be here a while.
So, does Sean Sublette think the two are related?
Well, I mean, I think to draw any connection to one specific weather event to climate change is very dicey. I mean, to say, okay, well, we had this tornado outbreak in October, and it's, you know, because we had so much snow in the winter, those two things are very difficult to tie together. I mean that's really some of the frontier research in climate science right now is trying to determine if these apparent anomalies are true anomalies, and if so, are they related to climate change? I think a bigger story is the heat wave they had in Russia last summer. In terms of, you're looking at an anomalous event, the length and the scale, the intensity of that heat wave, I think a lot of scientists are now beginning to say, you know what, that probably doesn't happen unless we've added this extra CO2 and other infrared active or greenhouse gases to the planet. Now, there have always been tornadoes in October. It's not a new phenomenon. There's always been this kind of secondary peak in tornadoes in the fall compared to the spring. Obviously, they're going to be fewer in the fall than the spring, but it's not unheard of. One of the things I caution people about is, you know, every time the weather is bad, don't say, well, it's climate change. Well, you know, there is more going on than that. You know, part of the reason we had a snowy winter was largely tied to the North Atlantic Oscillation and the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Basically, we were in a positive El Nino, which meant we had warmer water in the Pacific Ocean, and that tended to enhance, you know, to make a long story short, enhance the ferocity of the southern branch of the jet stream, which brings in more moisture. Conversely, we're in a negative phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation, and that has the tendency to deliver cold air masses into eastern North America, or really the eastern United States. Having said that, I think since we're going into a La Nina pattern now, or we've been in a La Nina pattern, that tends to bring in more warmth at a relatively higher latitude into North America. You have a stronger jet, a zonal jet, east to west jet, so it's a lot harder to get bigger cold outbreaks into eastern United States. So I know that's a very complicated answer, but it's just not simple. Anybody who tries to say, I have the answer in 30 minutes or in 30 seconds, 30 minutes, yeah, 30 seconds, is doing you a disservice.
Therefore, keep looking up.